In the early hours of Tuesday morning, Israel broke the ceasefire in Gaza, which had been in place for 2 months. Hundreds were killed in airstrikes, with the Israeli Prime Minister adamant the attacks will continue. Where does this leave the people of Gaza and negotiations for a truce? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister says the country has resumed combat in Gaza with full force. Benjamin Netanyahu has warned this is just the beginning and any negotiations will take place under fire. The White House says Israel consulted the Trump administration prior to the attacks. So, why did Israel break the ceasefire and can it be restored?
These are the scenes the people of Gaza hoped to never witness again. A fragile ceasefire broken with Israel renewing airstrikes across the Strip. Over 400 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. Hundreds more have been wounded, many of them women, children and the elderly.
The whole world is unjust. These are children. This is a young child, a girl. Here they are.
According to reports, 4 senior Hamas officials are among the dead. Israel says it broke the ceasefire, in place since January the 19th, to force Hamas to release the remaining hostages, and also claim Hamas are regrouping and rearming.
Israel does not target Palestinian civilians. We target Hamas terrorists. And when these terrorists embed themselves in civilian areas, when they use civilians as human shields, they're the ones who are responsible for all unintended casualties. Israel will fight, and Israel will win. We will bring our people home, and we will destroy Hamas. We will not relent until we achieve all these vital goals.
Hamas released a statement calling the attacks a blatant violation of all international and humanitarian conventions. Many of Gaza's 2 million residents were already facing food and water shortages. Israel blocked humanitarian aid and other supplies earlier this month after Hamas rejected its request to extend the first phase of the ceasefire. Now negotiations for the second phase have broken down in what was hoped was the start of a more lasting period of calm. As Palestinians once again desperately search for the dead under the rubble, can a ceasefire ever be revived?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us today in the studio, we have Yousef Alhelou. He's a Palestinian freelance journalist and documentary filmmaker. We also have James Smith. He's an emergency doctor who has worked on the ground in Gaza. And here with me, we have Yossi Mekelberg. He's an associate fellow at Chatham House. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Yousef, to you first of all, you have family in Gaza. You've spent so many years in Gaza. Just talk me through how you were feeling seeing the renewed devastation.
We expected the shattering of this ceasefire term because we knew Netanyahu wasn't interested to commit himself to the terms of the ceasefire. My family is struggling like the rest of the population. Bombs fall on their heads and they evacuated their house now in the northern part of Gaza, in Gaza City. We feel frustrated, angry that this conspiracy of silence is ongoing amidst the watchful eyes of the so-called civilized countries who watch Palestinian children, civilians torn to pieces while do nothing. Trump said that he is going to end wars, but it seems now he is going to support wars. He supplied Israel with weapons. And of course, he called for the expulsion of the Palestinians of Gaza. And it seems Palestinians' blood is the fuel for Israeli politicians. That's why Ben Gvir is back to the government now.
Yossi, just to you on that point, why do you think Netanyahu is doing this? And the Ben Gvir factor, him coming back into government, how much has that played a part here?
Then, obviously, the Israeli government will argue it for military reasons, for strategical reasons, but we are allowed to be very suspicious about the timing of all of it. Yesterday was a day that Netanyahu was supposed to give further evidence in his corruption trial. He was supposed to bring the dismissal of the head of the Shin Bet, the internal security at Ronen Bar, to the government, expecting massive demonstration within Israel. He is embroiled with trying to basically shut up the gatekeeper of Israel democracy. And his government is under threat. So, we saw what was the immediate result of it. The immediate result that Ben Gvir said, you renew the war, I'm joining, enlarging the coalition. And for Netanyahu, at the end of the day, is to remain in power as long as he can. And elections are not due until 2026. While he's facing his corruption trial, he would like to stay as a prime minister while he's facing all his legal issues. It becomes even more complicated for him because that's very ahead of Shin Bet. The Shin Bet is investigating some illegalities, connection with Qatar, for instance, where money came, when it comes to some of his closest advisors. In this situation, Netanyahu always needs an emergency situation with him. It can be one front or another, and unfortunately, as we just heard now, the suffering is the continuance of suffering of Palestinians in Gaza.
So do you agree with what Yousef said, that Palestinian blood is effectively fueling and keeping Netanyahu in power?
I'm not so sure I put it like this, but the reality is keeping the war going is what keeps Netanyahu in power. It can be attacking in Syria, it can be in Lebanon, it can be in the West Bank, it can be anywhere else. He needs to keep the situation that he's the Mr. Defender of Israel. There is no time to replace government when the war is going on. So as long as at least one front is ongoing, he can do. From an Israeli point of view, there is a huge suffering, obviously, in Gaza, but it means also that he gambles with the life of the hostages, mainly giving up on the life of the hostages.
We'll talk about the hostages in due course, but James, I want to bring you in. You've given up months of your life to volunteer, to go to Gaza, to risk your life to help the Palestinian people. Just talk us through your reading of what's actually left of the healthcare system.
Well, we're talking now about more than 16 months of an accelerated phase of a protracted genocide against the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza. As we know, the Ministry of Health in Gaza declared that the health system had collapsed in October of 2023. There has been no opportunity for recovery, even in the 2-month so-called ceasefire period. During that period, we've seen hundreds of breaches of the ceasefire agreement. And most egregiously, over the course of the last almost 3 weeks now, a total blockage of access for humanitarian aid into Gaza. That's inclusive of all of the equipment, medications, and so on that are required to maintain any sort of a functional healthcare system. In addition to sort of material resources, of course, you need to think about the other core pillars of a healthcare system, the human resources that are required to sustain a healthcare system. More than 1,100 healthcare workers working in the ministry, within the healthcare system in Gaza, have been killed since October of 2023. Our colleagues, some of whom I've been in touch with as recently as this morning, are despairing. They are beyond fatigued. There are some friends of mine who are literally now wishing that their lives will end. They do not want to continue under these circumstances. The healthcare system has effectively collapsed.
Just tell me, Israel has again targeted Deir al-Bella, which currently is home to international staff and a UN organization. Do you think that is being done to keep people like you away from Gaza?
So international humanitarian workers are a very, very small part of this story, and I certainly wouldn't sort of hone in on them as being integral, though, of course, there is real significance to measures of international solidarity, those people who are able to be physically present to work alongside our Palestinian colleagues. Now, more than 300 humanitarian workers have been killed in Gaza since October 2023. The vast majority of them are Palestinian humanitarian workers. There have been a small number of international UN workers that have been injured and killed. And as you mentioned, there was another attack on a UN facility in Deir al-Bala, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are now seeking some form of shelter. This has become an incredibly densely populated area. Several of the UN agencies and the wider humanitarian infrastructure moved to Deir al-Bala following the Israeli occupation's invasion of Rafah back in May of last year. The reports that we're hearing in relation to this particular attack are that several people have been injured. It's possible that one UN worker has been killed. They have been taken to Al-Aqsa Hospital, a hospital that I worked in, and have been treated with what limited medical resources still remain in the facility there.
So, Yousef, do you think what we're seeing now is the renewal of the war in Gaza, that there will be no stopping?
I think the commencement of this genocide will be more harsher. It seems that Netanyahu is not interested in stability in Gaza. He wants the people of Gaza to suffer in order for them to revolt against Hamas. He goes in line with Trump's plan to empty Gaza. He doesn't care about the hostages because he knows where they are being held. And the collective punishment that has been imposed, not only recently, but for the past 20 years, was aimed at crushing the morale and resilience of the Palestinian people and blame the Palestinian resistance for the misery. The carpet bombing did not spare anybody. 100 warplanes, including newly obtained F-35s, were used 2 nights ago to bomb Gazans while they were asleep at 2:30 a.m. Hamas has offered to release all the hostages at once in return for a permanent truce, but Netanyahu doesn't care. He just wants to prove his point that he's a tough guy, he's the king of Israel, and he is going to scare Arab nations. He's using Gaza as a testing ground. He's using Gaza as a scapegoat to scare other axes of resistance in the region.
Yossi, talk to me about the hostages then, because we've seen a lot of anger from the families and the wider Israeli public who are clearly very, very concerned about what is happening and what Netanyahu is doing here and the impact on their loved ones who are still being held in Gaza.
Anyone in their position will be really scared. They almost saw the opportunity, the chances of their family members, of their friends being released. They saw actually the conditions that the hostages have been released, the difficult conditions that they were held, the cruelty also of Hamas in treating the hostages. They want to see them back home. Out of the 59, maybe 25 are still alive. So they want it alive, but also to bury the rest of the hostages that were killed, some on October 7th, some later. This is a very, very natural, very human demand from the family of the hostages. And when they see that their own government is not interested in the hostages, it creates this anger. And it's not from now. We saw it yesterday in the demonstration in different places, but we've seen it for many months. We see if there is anything that is consistent in Israeli public opinion is the demand to do everything to return the hostages. It really goes back to the heart of the ethos of the Israeli society. They're doing everything to return hostages. It was Netanyahu himself that was ready to release more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for one soldier, Gilad Shalit at the time, because he knew this is part of the Israeli ethos. He changed. Why he changed? Because of the right wing, because of the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotrich of his government, that for them continuing the war, the expulsion of all the Palestinians, building settlements, all their messianic ideology, they are pushing and putting pressure on Netanyahu. He needs the coalition, and he caves in.
So let's just be clear here. The lives of the Israeli hostages don't matter to Netanyahu. It's the bigger picture. It's him staying in power. That's what we think.
There were so many opportunities to release from almost the first days of the war, when it was offered to release at least the women and the children for the release of female prisoners. The government refused. Last March, May, July, the same agreement that was signed eventually agreed in when Trump put pressure to agree to that was there months ago. The Israeli government refused. I think the only conclusion that we can draw that for Netanyahu, at best they are secondary priority, and it's worse, not a priority at all.
Yousef, to you, the attacks we've seen in the last few days, these have clearly been given the green light by Donald Trump in the White House.
Definitely. Netanyahu enjoys impunity, and he knows that he'll never be held accountable. he knows that Trump has blessed him already with the relocation of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And also, he's given a green light to exercise terrorism against the Palestinians in the West Bank. We've seen this not only in the past 15 months, but for the past decades. So Israel, as everybody agrees, is a pariah, brat state, enjoys impunity. And what's going on in Gaza is shameful on the stain of humanity. This conspiracy of silence must end. And silencing us Palestinians or pro-Palestinians is not going to work. There are so many Jewish people support our just cause. They take part in demonstrations in capitals worldwide, and often they are called self-hating Jews. And we know that the Palestinian cause is gaining popularity, the solidarity is improving, is gaining momentum, and silencing us, it's not going to work. It's a just cause, and even we have so many Israelis, they support our just cause, and some IDF soldiers, they refuse serving in the army anymore because they know, they see what they're doing. They're slaughtering innocent children, and the world is dismayed from this. We know people of the world are with us, but the government, they take a biased stance because they are being blackmailed. Palestinians were not responsible for the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, and this humiliation, this suffering must end. Palestinians must gain their freedom and to live in peace with their neighbors.
James, just talk to me about infrastructure and how things work then in Gaza, because what we see on TV, there doesn't seem to be very much left in terms of treating civilian casualties. So when these bombs are falling and the raids are happening, what can be done for people who survive the attacks?
I think the first thing to be really clear about is that this is manufactured scarcity. Academics prior to the onset, or rather the escalation of the genocide in October 23, had already described the titration of humanitarian aid. So people's lives effectively suspended in proximity to death, people living in manufactured, undignified conditions. That is a pillar or a key element of the ongoing occupation of Gaza, the ongoing siege of Gaza. With respect to the current situation, so in the last 24 hours, at least 436 people have been killed as a result of ongoing Israeli strikes throughout the Gaza Strip, more than 600 injured. Now, if you consider a single well-resourced healthcare facility in central London, you would declare a mass casualty incident if you had a small number of critically unwell or critically injured individuals.
A dozen or 2 dozen people?
Fewer than that.
Really?
You would call on additional surge of resources. You would divert non-urgent cases away from that particular hospital. You would bring in additional specialists to man the operating theatres and so on. If we consider, for example, Al-Aqsa Hospital, one of the hospitals that has received a significant number of the injured and killed in the last 24, 36 hours, you have an emergency workforce in the ER that are predominantly junior doctors. I worked with medical and nursing students that were dealing with trauma-wounded patients. On occasion, we ran out of gauze, IV cannulas, IV fluids, the most basic medical resources. We heard reports today from senior colleagues within the Ministry of Health that are saying that individuals with moderate to severe injuries in Gaza now, it's effectively a death sentence because there simply isn't the capacity or the resources available to treat those patients. So either you die from bleeding out, or you develop a secondary infection, or you're unable to get to an operating theatre in time. So injuries and other medical conditions that could have otherwise been survivable, the likelihood of surviving those kind of injuries under the current circumstances is very, very low.
James, when you speak to medical colleagues here in the UK, do they have any comprehension of how scarce resources are and what the Palestinian medics are up against?
I think there is a growing awareness of not only the humanitarian situation in Gaza and throughout occupied Palestine, but of course the political situation as well, the underlying political root causes. I think that we are seeing now a level of awareness and engagement with what's happening in Palestine that is certainly unprecedented in my lifetime. And that, of course, extends to healthcare workers as well. I think that that level of awareness is dictated in part by the media cycle. When attention turns away, when the media and political classes turn away, it is much more difficult to ensure that the general public have a comprehensive understanding of just how atrocious the situation currently is in Gaza.
Yossi, let's look back at the ceasefire then. There was always meant to be a second phase where Israeli military would withdraw completely from Gaza. It's clear that's not going to happen.
No, and we always knew that the second phase was the most difficult to reach. The second phase, the first one was truce, exchange of prisoners for hostages, the return of Gazan people to the north. This was all something that Israel could, especially the Netanyahu government, could accept. They never meant to go to the second phase because both sides basically stripped themselves of their main assets in the second phase. Hamas will release all the hostages, and Israel will accept end of war, while it promised at the beginning of the war the elimination of Hamas. And this, it was not an objective that was achievable, but now they're in a position to explain a year and a half of war, so many losses, making Israel's situation in the international community harder than ever, more difficult than ever, and at the same time, many of the hostages dying, and Hamas is still in Gaza. And I think there is also the tailwind that comes from Washington. The minute that's the idea, it's not a plan, it's not even a proposal, it's a completely unsavory idea from the Trump administration that you're putting on the table the expulsion of 2.3 million people. It's difficult for Netanyahu to go back to his right-wing coalition and say, I'm against it, when it comes from Washington. So what is great, it put on the table this terrible war crime as an option. So we all moved from the second phase, extending the first phase, which at the end of the day means the release of the hostages without the end of the war. But where is third phase of the reconstruction of Gaza? Where is going beyond the as you said, about going and moving and talking about peace between the people, that's evaporated altogether.
Yousef, just on that point about moving to stage 2 of the ceasefire, do you think Netanyahu had ever any intention of getting that far?
No, because there is no guarantee that Netanyahu would stop there until all Israeli captives are released. He has more ambitions to reoccupy Gaza. He wants to appease the settler movement. He wants to crush the resolve and morale of the Palestinians. He wants to make life miserable for Palestinians to leave outside Gaza to Egypt or Jordan or elsewhere. And we've seen Trump was promoting this plan. The dehumanization and demonization of Palestinians reached unlimited, unbelievable limit. Also, the suffering of Palestinians didn't start only in the past 1 year and a half. It started 20 years ago, and Gaza has been always a concentration camp, the largest open-air prison, and people refuse to leave. Some would leave, to be honest, but we know that Netanyahu is not going to stop there. We anticipated the fallout of this ceasefire. Palestinians are exhausted in Gaza, and of course, they are paying a heavy price for Netanyahu's political games. This nonsense has to stop.
And Yousef, just on a personal note, you've made a documentary about life in Gaza. I understand you will be showing it in Sarajevo, in Derry, Cork, Dublin.
Different capitals worldwide. I was lucky in the summer 2023 to visit Gaza, to reunite with my family, to see Gaza and reconnect with my city, the home of my birth. I managed to visit all of the historical places. I shot 15 hours of footage, and I managed to produce a documentary film to maintain the legacy of Gaza, how it was before, how it was after. It's my love letter to my home city. And as I always say, that Gaza will rise from the ashes. Unfortunately, there is an attempt to silence us. I lost my Instagram account with over 1 million followers. But we will not stop there. We will show to the world that Palestinians deserve to be given freedom, to have dignity. We are normal people, like the Israelis, you know. The root cause of the problem is the military occupation, the colonization, the demonization, and the racism and discrimination. And as long as Palestinians are suffering under this occupation, there will never be peace and stability in the region.
Thanks, Yousef. James, final point to you. I know in your heart of hearts you would love to go back and help and volunteer and work in Gaza again. Is that even possible now?
Well, for many international medical and humanitarian workers, the answer is no. We know that the Israeli regime has denied several medical teams access to Gaza. We know that anyone with Palestinian heritage, however far back that goes, is no longer able to access Gaza. The situation, certainly since the Israeli occupation forces invaded and destroyed the Rafah crossing with Egypt, has become much more complicated because people now need to travel from Jordan through 48 and via the Kerem Abu Salam crossing into Gaza. The logistics of that, and of course, Israel's complete control over that process makes it very, very difficult. But at the same time, the answer really isn't more emergency medical teams. We could have hundreds, thousands of international medical workers and international humanitarian workers in Gaza at this moment in time, and they would be able to do very, very little for as long as the violence continues.
James, we wish you well as ever, and Yousef and Yossi, thank you both for your time on this roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.